Purim Challenge 3. Part of our ongoing 4-part Purim Challenge, putting together these 4 thoughts on Purim and see whether we can find a common denominator, a common theme in these 4 little ideas, these 4 short ideas about Purim. The third idea of Purim is, the Gemara says that on the way to pick up Mordechai, to bring him, to lead him on a horse wearing the king's robes in the streets of Shushan, Haman came upon Mordechai, and Mordechai was learning and teaching 22,000 students in yeshiva. 22,000 students. And he was teaching him the laws of Kemitza. So the Kohen takes his hand like this with the flour, lets off the flour from the bottom, lets off the flour from the top, and this is called Kemitza. So he was teaching the children that this is how the Kohen takes the flour and places it on the Mizbeach. So when he saw and he waited for Mordechai to finish his shir before taking him on the horse of the king, he looked at him and he said, Haman said to Mordechai, your handful of flour has pushed away my 10,000 talents of silver. Your one handful of flour of the Kohen has pushed away my attempt to destroy the Jews with 10,000 talents of silver with which I tried to bribe Achashverosh. What happened? He took Mordechai from the yeshiva, put him on a horse, put him on the king's robes. In chapter 6, Pasuk Yud Aleph of the Megillah says, Vayikach Haman es halavush ves hasus, vayalbesh es Mordechai v'arkiveyu berchov ha'ir, vayikra lefanav, kacha yeyaser la'ish asher hamelech chafetz b'karo. And Haman took Mordechai and placed him on a horse in the streets and led him in the streets of Shushan and called before him, such shall be done to the man who finds favor in the eyes of the king. The next verse says, Vayashav Mordechai el Sha'ar HaMelech. Mordechai came off the horse, went back to the gate of the king. The Haman nidchaf el Beisai. And he was pushed, Haman was pushed to his house. Avel v'chafui rosh, covered his head, and he was in mourning. What does it mean that right after the parade of Mordechai throughout the streets, he returned to Sha'ar HaMelech? He put back on his sackcloth, his ashes, and mourning the forthcoming decree of destroying the Jews in 11 months from then. The decree was made in Nisan for the following Adar, 11 months later, that on the 13th of Adar, all the Jews would be destroyed. The question is asked, what is this big fuss about the parade and the leading of Mordechai throughout the streets of Shushan and the great joy of seeing Haman humiliated and Mordechai lifted up? If the decree was still extant, the decree against the Jews was still in force. It didn't help. It didn't help the situation. It didn't change anything. The decree was still hanging over the Jewish people's heads. The decree was not annulled because of the parade of Mordechai being led by Haman in the streets. It is a reward for saving the king's life. But the fasting and the tainis, the 3-day fasting went on. And they fasted on Pesach. The decree to fast was on the first day of Pesach. They didn't have a Pesach Seder that year. Mordechai decreed, in accordance with Esther's statement, that the Jews should fast for 3 days. And the first day of the fasting was on Pesach. They didn't eat matzah. They abrogated a Torah law because of the fasting of the possible genocide of the Jewish people. And they didn't have matzah on Pesach. It was the first day of the 3 days, was Pesach. And after the parade, he went back to the Sha'ar HaMelech, the gate of the king, wearing sackcloth. What is this big deal we make about the parade? Why do we make such a fuss of the parade? What is it teaching us? So my Rosh Yeshiva, Rav Mendel Weinbach, Zecher Tzaddik Livracha, says that when the parade occurred, when the head of the Sanhedrin, Mordechai, was led by its arch enemy, the people of Shushan, the Jewish people, thought to themselves the following: maybe the tide is turning. Maybe Mordechai can use his influence to avert the decree. The parade gave the Jewish people hope. It gave them tikva. It gave them something to pray, for. And says Rav Mendel, God does not intervene in our lives unless we have hope and trust in God. Unless we are positive. When we are despairing, God does not intervene. When we're despairing, as we said, God despairs with us. When we smile, God smiles with us. When we hope, God hopes with us. Hashem tzilcha al yad yaminecha. Hashem is our shadow on our right hand. The miracle of Purim must occur only based on our faith and our emunah and our hope and our positivity. The hope of redemption is itself what brings the redemption. That's called having an engagement of a relationship with God. If you believe God can redeem, he will redeem. If you believe he will not redeem, he will not redeem. Miracles do not happen in our lives out of despair. They only happen out of hope. And says, Rav Mendel, therefore, our hope that Hashem gave us the hope that Mordechai was being led by Haman, gave us a glimmer of hope upon which it was a peg of hope upon which Hashem could bring the redemption. Because of our effort, of our hope, of our emunah, upon that emunah, that was the harbinger, that was the conduit, that was the tzinor, that was the pipeline to bring the redemption. Says Rav Moshe, when the decree to destroy the Jews on the 13th of Adar was promulgated by Achashverosh, and after Haman was killed, so Esther Hamalka Queen Esther went to the king and said, please annul the decree. The king said that the decree of the king ein lahashiv. The decree of the king cannot be annulled. That's the law of Persia. A decree of the king cannot be annulled. You can defend yourselves on the 13th of Adar, but the decree of annihilation, the genocide of the Jewish people, was not annulled. Says Rav Moshe, that decree has never been annulled. It is hanging over our heads. It has not been annulled. Achashverosh said, I cannot annul the decree. Once a king makes a decree, it cannot be annulled. Which means, says Rav Moshe, that the Gemara says that one day Hashem will establish Adam Ra Haman, an evil person like Haman, who will want to kill the Jews once again on one day. Says Rav Moshe, not on one day, in 1 hour. The successors of Haman and Achashverosh in Paras in Iran have stated many times they are going to annihilate the Jewish people, not in 1 day, man, woman, and child, in 1 hour, in 1 minute. And we know what that could be. And therefore, Rav Moshe says we should wake up and we should do teshuvah, because the decree of Achashverosh is still hanging over our heads, and we see it clearly. And it fell on our heads many, many times in Jewish history. That decree has been attached to us on many times in Jewish history. And now it's happening from the very same place, the very same people who declare that they are going to annihilate anashim, nashim, v'taf, men, women, and children on 1 day, says Rav Moshe, in 1 hour. Rav Moshe says in 1 minute. And we know what that means. What's the antidote to that? The antidote is the parade. The antidote is not despair. The antidote is not to give up hope. The antidote is to believe, to have hope, to have emunah. That's the only way the redemption can come.